Okay, picture this with me for a moment. The date is August 16th, 1920,
Hmm.
and we are standing in the mud in Skagway, Alaska. Now, if you know anything about the geography, even today, Skagway is this remote, jagged little port town.
Right. It feels like it's at the end of the earth.
It really does. It was basically carved out of the wilderness during the Klondike Gold Rush. But by 1920, I mean, the gold rush is long over. The town is quiet. It's isolated.
And it's freezing.
It is freezing. You've got the coastal mountain range just towering over you, basically boxing you in against the sea. It really feels like the edge of the world.
It wasn't just a feeling, though. It was a physical, crushing reality.
Sure.
You were, for all intents and purposes, cut off from the rest of the world for huge chunks of the year.
Yeah.
No roads out,
Mhm.
just the sea and those mountains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So on this specific afternoon around 3:30, the whole rhythm of the town just it breaks. Everything stops.
Yeah.
Men, women, children, they all come rushing out of their cabins, out of the businesses, into the
So
field.
dropping everything.
Dropping everything. They're standing there in the slush. You can see their breath steaming in the cold air. But they aren't looking at each other. They're not looking at the mountains. They're all looking up.
Because something is coming.
Because coming over those peaks, battling the downdrafts, is a de Havilland DH-4 biplane.
Which for them must have looked like something straight out of a Jules Verne novel.
Yeah.
It's like an alien spacecraft made of canvas and wood and just noise.
Oh, the noise. The local paper, the Daily Alaskan, they later described it as a beautiful sight. But I want you to really put yourself in that muddy field for a second. Just think about the psychology of that moment.
Yeah.
You're a pioneer. You're living in this profound, deep silence. And then suddenly, 2 tons of smoking, clattering machinery comes roaring out of the sky. It's loud. It's probably terrifying.
And it's exhilarating, all at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a rupture in their entire reality. And that image, right, that idea of the Skagway residents just staring up at that plane, that is the perfect metaphor for what we're talking about today.
It really is.
Because in a very real economic sense, every single one of us is standing in that field in Skagway right now.
We are having our own Skagway moment, but instead of a biplane, we are all looking up at artificial intelligence. We're staring at this massive, noisy, kind of terrifying force coming over the mountain.
And we have the exact same questions.
The very same questions those Alaskans did. Is this just a curiosity? Is this a circus act passing through? Or is this machine about to fundamentally rewrite how we live, how we work, and maybe even how we survive?
And that is the perfect launch pad for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are going to be unpacking a fascinating, really data-heavy and incredibly timely book. It's called Coming Into View by Joseph H. Davis, Ph.D.
Now, Davis is the global chief economist at Vanguard, and I want to flag that right away because this isn't, some tech influencer just speculating on Twitter or a futurist making wild guesses on a blog.
Not at all. This is serious stuff.
This is deep economic history, and it's backed by one of the largest investment firms in the entire world. I mean, this is the guy whose job it is to figure out where the money goes for millions of people.
Precisely. And the mission for this deep dive is, it's very distinct.
Yeah.
We're not here to talk about what the stock market is going to do next week or what NVIDIA's earnings are going to be next quarter.
We are zooming out.
Way, way out. We're looking at the horizon.
Right.
We're trying to see the year 2035. And Davis's whole argument is that if you want to understand where we're going, you have to look past the daily noise. You have to understand the mega trends, the tectonic plates that are shifting underneath the global economy.
It's funny you mention the daily noise because the book actually kicks off with a story about cutting right through that noise. And strangely enough, it involves a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
It does. It's a great origin story for the whole research project. It kind of grounds all this high-level abstract economics in a very real, very human moment.
So take us there. It's 2004. Joseph Davis is a young economist. He's relatively new to Vanguard, and he gets an invitation to have lunch with a legend. The legend, Jack Bogle, the founder of Vanguard.
A true titan of the industry.
Yeah.
I mean, the father of index investing. The man who basically democratized investing for the average person.
Right. So Davis is probably, I would be terrifyingly nervous. He's expecting, a white tablecloth power lunch in some fancy boardroom, maybe waiters with silver trays.
Sure, he's prepping his talking points.
He's prepping his notes on interest rates, GDP, the Fed's latest moves, all the standard economist stuff.
Yeah.
He walks into the galley, which turns out to be just the company cafeteria. And there's Jack Bogle. And what is the billionaire founder eating?
A peanut butter and jelly sandwich and drinking a diet iced tea.
That is just such a power move. It screams, I don't need to impress anyone. Let's get to the real stuff.
It really is. But that lunch was absolutely pivotal because Jack wasn't interested in any of that short-term noise that Davis had prepared. He didn't care about next month's interest rate hike. He challenged him. Okay? He said something to the effect of, I need a framework for long-run returns. The standard formulas we all use, things like the KP ratio or basic trend lines, they work okay for normal times. But, he said, they don't account for the massive forces outside the market.
The stuff that isn't on the spreadsheet.
The stuff that isn't on the spreadsheet. Specifically, he called out technology and debt. He was basically asking for the missing variables in the equation.
Wow.
He told Davis to go figure out how those big external forces changed the math of the market. He sent him away with a homework assignment, go figure out how the world actually changes over the long term.
And this book, Coming Into View, is essentially the final paper for that 20-year-old homework assignment.
It is. It's the culmination of 2 decades of research, all trying to answer Jack Bogle's simple but profound question. How do we invest when the world isn't just cycling through a normal recession or boom, but is fundamentally changing?
Okay, so let's unpack this. Davis says to understand the future, we first have to get a handle on why we are so bad at predicting it. And he identifies this enemy in our own brains. He calls it status quo bias.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard the term, but break it down for us in this specific context.
So this is a concept that comes out of the work of Richard Taylor, the Nobel Prize winner in behavioral economics. And status quo bias is just this a psychological preference we all have for things to stay the same.
We like what we know.
We love what we know.
Oh.
And in investing and economics, it's the default assumption that the future is going to look roughly like the recent past.
So if the last 10 years gave us, say, 2% growth, 2% inflation, and really low interest rates, our brains just sort of copy and paste that onto the next 10 years.
Exactly. We assume that's the baseline. We assume that's normal. And that is so dangerous. It feels safe, it feels comfortable, and it definitely feels like the consensus view.
Well, yeah, if you predict the status quo in a meeting, you're never the outlier. No one thinks you're crazy.
You never look stupid. If you say, next year will probably be a lot like this year, nobody argues with you. But Davis's whole point is that assuming the status quo is actually the most radical assumption you can make.
How so?
Because history rarely, if ever, moves in a straight line. It moves in shifts, in jumps, in massive disruptions.
It's like assuming that just because it's been sunny for 3 days straight, it's never going to rain again. Or because you've never been in a car accident, you never will be.
It's the exact same logic.
Yeah.
And Baylor's work on the nudge concept suggests we actually need to be actively pushed. We need to be nudged out of this comfort zone. We need to realize that assuming nothing will change is actually the riskiest bet of all. When those tectonic plates are moving, standing still is the most dangerous thing you can possibly do.
Especially right now,
Yeah.
because we are staring down a phenomenon that it completely defies the status quo. And Davis gives us a tool to help visualize this change. He calls it the J curve.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, just picture a capital letter J. It goes down first into a dip, and then it shoots straight up.
And he uses the history of electricity to explain this, and it is the perfect historical parallel. If you want to understand where we might be with AI, you have to look at where we were with electricity about 100 years ago.
Okay.
Think about the Palace of Electricity at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair.
The World's Fairs back then were huge deals, right? They were like CES, the Super Bowl, and a viral TikTok trend all rolled into one massive event.
They were everything. And that 1904 palace was just dazzling. It was lit by thousands and thousands of bulbs. It literally hummed with power. It was the future made visible.
But there's a catch.
There's a huge catch that Davis points out. In 1900, right around that time, only about 5% of factories were actually using electricity to power their machines effectively.
5%.
5. So it was known, it was visible, it was at the fair, everyone knew about it, but it wasn't actually being used in the real economy.
That seems baffling to me. I mean, if it was so obviously superior to steam cleaner, quieter, more powerful, why wasn't every single factory owner ripping out their steam engines and plugging in?
Because of the dip in the J-curve. This is phase 1. When a new general-purpose technology, that's the official economic term for something that changes everything, like steam or electricity or AI when it first appears, productivity often drops or stays flat.
It drops. That feels so counterintuitive. You buy the better, faster tech, you should get better, faster results immediately.
It makes sense, though, if you think about the logistics and the human element of it all. So first, companies have to spend a massive amount of money just to install the new tech. They're buying the electric motors, they're wiring the entire building. That's a huge capital expense.
Okay, that part makes sense.
But, and this is the absolute crucial part, they haven't figured out how to reorganize their work to actually use it yet.
Can you give us a concrete example of that? Like what was happening on the actual factory floor?
Sure, so in the steam era, you had one gigantic steam engine, usually in the basement.
Right.
It turned this massive central drive shaft, which then used a crazy system of belts and pulleys to power every single machine in the building.
I'm picturing a Charlie Chaplin movie.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
And because of that setup, the machines had to be arranged in these long, straight lines based on where the shaft was,
No.
not based on what the most logical workflow was.
Okay.
So when electricity came along, what did the factory owners do? They just swapped out the giant steam engine for a giant electric motor.
Mm.
But they kept the belts. They kept the pulleys. They kept the old, inefficient layout.
So you have these massive new investment costs, you've bought this expensive new motor, but you're using the new technology in the exact same old way. You haven't unlocked any of the efficiency.
You've just paved the cow path. That's what leads to the productivity dip. That's the bottom of the J. You're spending all this money, you're disrupting your operations, and you're seeing zero results. In fact, you might even be losing money because of all the confusion and retraining.
But then it comes phase two. The long stem of the J that goes up.
Phase 2 is the surge. And this happens when the process is finally changed to match the new technology. In that factory example, it was the moment someone realized, wait a minute, with electricity, I can put a small, cheap motor on each individual machine.
Ah.
I can get rid of all the belts and pulleys. I can arrange the machines in the logical order of production. I can create an assembly line. And once they did that, once they reorganized the work itself, productivity just rocketed upward.
And the central question Davis poses is, where is AI on that curve right now?
That's the whole ballgame.
That is the question, isn't it? Because it feels like we're in the dip. You see companies spending billions and billions on AI chips and data centers. NVIDIA is selling every single chip they can possibly make, but I'm not sure the average office worker is suddenly twice as productive. I'm certainly not answering my emails twice as fast.
And that is the trillion-dollar question. Are we in the dip of the J-curve, just on the verge of seeing this massive vertical spike like we did with electricity, or the personal computer?
Yeah.
Or, and this is the scary alternative, is AI just a blip? Is it something distracting, like social media, that changes how we spend our free time, but doesn't actually make us more efficient at our jobs? Is it just a toy?
And that distinction blip versus J-curve, that's what determines whether we are rich or we are poor in 2035.
It's as simple as that. If it's a blip, we stagnate. We spent all this money and effort for nothing.
Yeah.
If it's a J-curve, we transform the entire economy. And Davis, for his part, he leans heavily toward the J-curve theory, but he qualifies it with what he calls the megatrends.
Right.
He says you can't just look at AI in a vacuum. You have to look at it in the context of these other giant forces, work, demographics, and debt.
So let's move to that first megatrend then, because this is the one that keeps people up at night. Technology and the future of work. Everyone is worried a robot is going to take their job. I mean, every time ChatGPT writes a half-decent poem, a copywriter somewhere starts to sweat.
For good reason.
And Davis addresses this head-on. He tells a tale of two professions. He compares a woman named Rose DiMaggio Trella, who was an AT&T operator in 1996, with fund accountants in the 1990s.
It's a really stark contrast, and it perfectly illustrates the two primary ways that technology can hit the labor market. It's a very compassionate, but also very clear-eyed look at job displacement.
So let's start with Rose.
Okay. Rose was an operator. Her job was to connect calls. She was literally the switch, physically or digitally bridging two lines together. When automated switching technology came along, it didn't help her do her job better. It did her job.
It wasn't a tool for her to use. It was her replacement.
It was her replacement. That is automation in its purest, most destructive form for that specific worker. Rose goes home, the machine stays. And that is the primal fear that everyone has about AI.
But on the complete flip side, you have the fund accountants. Tell us about them.
Right. So in the 80s and 90s, you have the spreadsheet and the personal computer becoming totally ubiquitous. Lotus, 123, Microsoft Excel. Now, the logical intuition, that status quo intuition would tell you, oh, computers can do math way faster than humans, so we're going to need fewer accountants.
Of course. If one accountant with Excel can do the work of 5 accountants with pencils and ledger books, you fire 4 of them. That's just basic math.
That's the standard fear. Efficiency equals unemployment. But the exact opposite happened. The technology augmented the accountants. It took away the horrible grunt work of manual calculation, adding up columns, checking for arithmetic errors over and over again.
The stuff nobody wanted to do anyway.
The boring, error-prone stuff. And this made accounting cheaper and much, much faster. And because it was cheaper, the demand for more complex accounting services just skyrocketed. Companies started asking for more analysis, more what-if scenarios, more frequent reports. The number of accountants actually tripled during that period.
Wow. Which brings us to this concept Davis talks about called the lump of labor fallacy. I love this term because it sounds like a terrible medical diagnosis. I'm sorry, ma'am, you have a lump of labor.
It does sound grim, doesn't it? It's a very common economic trap that people fall into. It's the idea that there is a fixed amount, a finite lump of work to be done in the world. As if there's a pile of dirt, and once we shovel that pile of dirt, that's it. Work is over.
So if a machine comes along and shovels half the pile, there's just less for the humans to do.
But the economy isn't a fixed pile of dirt. History shows, again and again, that when technology lowers the cost of a task, it almost always creates new demand and entirely new types of work. We don't just have a fixed pile of chores to do. Our needs and wants expand as our capabilities expand.
Can you give an example?
Sure. When you make light cheap with the light bulb, people don't just sit in the dark to save money. They light up entire cities. They invent night shifts for factories. They invent night baseball games. The lump of things to do with light gets bigger.
So Davis introduces this triangle of transformation. It's technology, work, and society's needs all interacting. It's not just about what the tech can do. It's about what society needs done.
And that leads us directly to the specific forecasts for 2035. Because Davis doesn't just talk in theories. He goes deep into specific jobs to see if they're more likely to be a Rose the Operator situation or a fund accountant situation. He's looking for the nuance.
Okay, let's look at some of these. Nurses. The book highlights nursing as a high augmentation field, and thank goodness, because nurses are so overworked as it is.
Yes. Think about what a nurse actually does during a grueling 12-hour shift. A huge portion of their day, some studies put it as high as 40%, is currently spent on record-keeping, data entry, dealing with insurance codes, checking charts, verifying drug interactions on a computer.
That's the task.
That is the task. And AI can automate those tasks beautifully. It can listen to a doctor-patient interaction and autofill the electronic health record. It can flag potential drug interactions instantly.
But the job of a nurse isn't just filling out the chart.
Exactly. The job of a nurse, the actual patient care, the empathy, the physical triage, the skill of noticing that a patient just looks a little pale, holding a hand during a painful procedure, that cannot be automated. So if AI takes the paperwork off their plate, it frees up the nurse to do more of the actual nursing.
It's a classic augmentation scenario. The nurse becomes superhumanly efficient at the administrative part, which lets them be more human with the patients.
Precisely.
Okay, what about financial advisors? That one feels a little closer to the spreadsheet danger zone. Is an AI going to replace the person who manages my 401k?
It's a very similar story. High augmentation. Look, if an advisor is spending 4 hours of their day just organizing client data, rebalancing portfolios according to a formula, and running basic Monte Carlo simulations, AI can do all of that in seconds. And frankly, the AI can probably do the math better, without errors.
So why doesn't the advisor get fired? If the robot is picking the stocks and doing the math, why do I need the human?
Because money is never just about math. It's emotional. The advisor can now spend all that freed up time actually building the relationship, understanding the client's deep-seated emotional goals, handling complex family dynamics, and most importantly, talking them off the ledge when the market crashes.
The AI provides the data.
And the human provides the wisdom, the coaching, and the trust.
Now, here's one that really surprised me when I read it. Electricians. Davis says this job is safe, but also it won't see a huge productivity boost from AI.
This is such a crucial point for understanding the limits of AI. AI lives in the digital world. It is a creature of screens and servers and data. An electrician lives in the messy, unpredictable physical world.
Right.
An AI cannot crawl into a dusty crawl space, navigate a chaotic renovation site that's full of debris, strip a wire with its fingers, identify some weird, dangerous DIY splice that someone did in 1970, and then physically install a new breaker box. The dexterity and the physical problem-solving required is just light years beyond what current robotics can do.
So the robots aren't coming for the skilled blue-collar jobs.
Not the complex, non-repetitive ones.
Yeah.
The electrician is safe from replacement. But here's the other side of that coin. Because AI can't really help them pull wire through a wall any faster, Their personal productivity growth is limited. They're constrained by physics.
They're safe, but they aren't riding that steep J curve the same way a coder or an accountant might be.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of coders, programmers, this one feels like it's right in the crosshairs. I mean, all my developer friends are already using AI coding assistants.
It is shifting, and shifting rapidly. The task of writing code, literally typing out the syntax, remembering where the semicolon goes, finding a bug that is being automated. We see this right now with tools like GitHub Copilot.
So what's left?
The profession is shifting from being a coder to being more of a data scientist or a systems architect.
So it becomes less about knowing the specific programming language and more about knowing what to tell the machine to do.
You got it. It's less about speaking the language of the machine and more about telling the machine what problems need to be solved in the first place. The barrier to entry for simple coding drops, but the requirement for high-level, structural, creative thinking goes way up.
So the final verdict from Davis on this is that we're mostly looking at co-pilots, not replacements.
Predominantly, yes. The model is that AI takes the tasks, the boring, repetitive, administrative parts of our day, and automates them, which leaves the job, the complex, human, creative parts intact and maybe even enhanced.
It destroys tasks, not jobs.
That distinction is absolutely vital.
That's a pretty hopeful view. But we have to balance that optimism against the next megatrend. And this is the one that usually gets people feeling pretty pessimistic. Megatrend number 2, demographics.
Ah, yes. The graying of the world, the creeping crisis that nobody wants to talk about at parties.
And Davis, again, he introduces us to a character to humanize the data. This time, it's Kathleen Casey Kirschling. She was born 1 second past midnight on January 1st, 1946.
A historic second in time.
She is officially the very first baby boomer, the first person in a tidal wave of a generation. And now she and her entire massive generation are reaching retirement age. Kathleen is in her late 70s now.
Right.
And there's this famous saying in economics, I think it's attributed to the philosopher Auguste Comte, that demographics is destiny.
We hear it all the time.
The idea being that if your population is shrinking or getting older, your economy is just doomed to shrink too. Fewer people working equals less GDP. It seems like simple, unavoidable math.
It sounds like simple math. If GDP is just the number of workers times their productivity and the number of workers goes down, then GDP has to go down. Davis argues that this is a myth, or at the very least, it's vastly overstated.
How can it be? The math seems so solid. If you have fewer people making things, you make fewer things.
Not necessarily. Davis and his team looked at the data across dozens of countries and went back centuries. They went way, way back. And what they found was that 52% of the time, so literally more than half the time, economies continued to grow even when their population growth slowed down or their population actually shrank.
That's completely counterintuitive. How does an economy grow with fewer people?
Innovation. Productivity. If you have fewer workers, but each of those workers is vastly more productive because of new technology, you can still get overall growth. I mean, look at Japan. Their population has been aging and shrinking for decades, but they've maintained an incredibly high standard of living through efficiency, through automation, and through high-value production.
There's also this other stereotype, right? That old people just stop spending money, that they sit on their porches, they hoard their cash, and maybe they buy some cat food.
In fact, #5 in the book just completely debunks this. Spending doesn't fall off a cliff when you retire. It just shifts. A 75-year-old might not be in the market for a new minivan or buying business suits for the office. They're not buying cribs or paying for college tuition anymore.
Okay.
But they are spending heavily on other things, on services, on travel and leisure, and especially on healthcare. The demand in the economy changes. It doesn't just disappear. The economy reorients itself to serve this new, older demographic.
But we still have a labor shortage problem, don't we? Even if they're spending, they aren't working. If all the boomers retire, who's going to do the work? Who's going to change the bedpans? Who's going to file the taxes?
This is the magic moment. This is where the megatrends collide. This is what Davis calls the AI offset. It's the direct interaction between the technology trend and the demographic trend. And he calculates something he calls the worker equivalent.
Okay, let's unpack that number because it really does feel like a magic trick.
It's fascinating. So Davis estimates that by the year 2035, looking at the rate of task automation we were just talking about, the nurses, the accountants, the coders' AI could perform the tasks equivalent to the work of 16 million full-time human workers.
16 million virtual workers.
That's right. Now, coincidentally, or as he puts it, providentially, that number, 16 million, is almost exactly the size of the labor gap that we expect from the retiring boomers and the shrinking workforce.
So wait, the robots aren't taking our jobs? They're filling the empty desks left behind by the retirees.
That is exactly the argument. Technology arrives just in the nick of time to solve the demographic problem. It isn't a crisis, it's a handoff. The robots take over the tasks that the humans are either too old or too few to do anymore. It essentially plugs the hole in the sinking ship of demographics.
Wow. That connects perfectly to the next challenge, and honestly, this is the really scary one. Megatrend number 3, the debt mountain. Because even if we have enough robot workers, we still have to pay our bills.
The one everyone loves to ignore until it's impossible to ignore. The elephant in the room.
And Davis starts this section with another great character, Ida Mae Fuller. In 1940, she received the very first Social Security check ever issued.
And do you remember how much it was for?
It was something tiny, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like $22.54.
Wrecked, which was a decent amount of money back then. But here's the real kicker. Ida Mae Fuller lived to be 100 years old.
Wow.
She paid a grand total of about $24 into the Social Security system in taxes over her working life. And she collected over $22,000 in benefits.
Good for Ida. That's a great return on investment.
Great for Ida, a complete disaster for the actuarial tables. Her story perfectly represents this systemic issue. We built these safety nets, Social Security, Medicare-based, on assumptions that people would die shortly after they retired. We assumed a pyramid structure with lots of young workers supporting just a few old retirees.
But people just kept living longer.
They kept living longer, and now that system, those entitlements, are the biggest line item in the federal budget.
We all see the national debt clock in New York City, that famous, terrifying counter that just ticks up and up and up into the trillions. It feels completely unsustainable. But Davis makes a very important distinction here between debt and deficits.
This is so critical for listeners to grasp because the headlines get this wrong all the time. Debt is the total pile of money the country owes. Think of it like the total mortgage on your house.
Right.
The deficit is how much you are overspending in just this year. It's like your monthly credit card bill that you couldn't pay off.
Okay, follow that.
And Davis uses history to show why the total number, the debt, matters a lot less than the context, which is the deficit and, crucially, economic growth. Look at the 1940s.
World War II.
The U.S. had astronomical debt. It was over 100% of GDP. We borrowed everything we could to fight the war. We were leveraged to the eyeballs. But the structural deficit, the built-in recurring overspending, was actually low. Taxes were high, and the massive spending was for a temporary emergency. Everyone knew the war would end. And once the war did end, growth just exploded. We stopped all the emergency spending, and the debt just kind of melted away relative to the size of the booming economy.
Now, contrast that with the 1970s.
In the 70s, the total debt was actually quite low. We didn't owe that much money. But our fiscal health was terrible. We had high inflation, economic stagnation, all these structural issues. We were spending more than we made on a permanent basis. So the point is, the raw number on that debt clock doesn't actually tell you if you're in trouble.
It's about your ability to pay and your trajectory. Are you getting better or worse?
Exactly. And that brings us to the danger zone today. The danger is what Davis calls the tug of war. This is the core conflict of the entire book.
Right.
We have this massive pile of debt. The interest payments on that debt are rising because interest rates aren't zero anymore. The central question is, can we grow our economy using that AI productivity boost we talked about? Can we grow it faster than the interest payments on the debt grow?
It's a race.
It is a literal race between the silicon chips in data centers and the treasury bonds being issued by the government.
Yeah.
If AI works, if we get that J-curve surge, we grow our way out of the debt problem. We generate enough tax revenue to pay the bills easily. If AI fails, or if it's just a blip, or if we regulate it to death, then the debt suffocates us. The interest payments will eat the entire federal budget, leaving nothing for roads or schools or defense.
Which brings us to the global stage, part 5, the global view. Who wins this race? Because this isn't just an American problem, it's happening everywhere.
So Davis takes us back one last time to that 1904 World's Fair. He says, look who was at the Palace of Electricity. This is the U.S., Japan, Germany, the UK. And then he asks, who wasn't there?
China. Russia?
Exactly. And that attendance list from 1904 basically predicted the economic winners of the entire 20th century. If you showed up to the electricity party, you had a pretty good century.
If you embrace the new technology, you won.
You won. If you ignored it, you lost. The Ottoman Empire ignored it, they vanished. So Davis asked the same question today. Who is at the Palace of AI?
I'm guessing the guest list has changed a bit.
Drastically. Today, the clear, undisputed leaders in AI investment and research are the United States and China. They are neck and neck. They're the ones spending the billions. They have the massive data centers, the top talent, the most advanced algorithms.
But they both have some serious baggage.
They do. It's almost a mirror image. Both the U.S. and China have terrible demographics, rapidly aging populations, and they both have massive debt loads. The saying goes that China risks getting old before it gets rich, while the U.S. is already rich but is getting old very fast.
And what about Europe and Japan?
They're lagging. They have these severe demographic headwinds. Japan is the oldest society in world history. Europe's population is shrinking, but they aren't investing in AI at nearly the same scale as the U.S. and China. They risk falling behind in the productivity race. They might end up being consumers of AI, buying it from American or Chinese companies, but not being the engines of it.
So the real showdown for the next decade is the U.S. versus China.
It's a race to see whose innovation can outrun their aging population and their debt. Can China automate its factories fast enough before its workforce retires? Can the U.S. automate its service economy before the interest on the debt explodes?
Okay, let's zoom in on the U.S. then, because this is the core of the book's prediction. Davis runs millions of simulations. He's a Vanguard economist, so of course he loves a good Monte Carlo simulation. But they basically boil down to two main possible futures for the year 2035. He calls this the fork in the road.
And remember, the consensus view, what the market currently expects, the status quo is just more the same. 2% growth forever. Davis thinks that is the least likely outcome. He thinks we're not going to land in the middle. We're heading for one of two extremes.
So let's walk through scenario A. He calls this one AI disappoints, deficits drag.
This is the pessimistic path, and Davis gives this a 30–40% probability, so not insignificant.
Paint the picture for us. What does 2035 feel like in this world? I wake up, I pour my coffee. What's different?
Honestly, not much. He says it feels like the 1990s, but without the dial-up modem screech. The technology has improved, sure. Your phone is faster, the screen is clearer, but your daily life hasn't fundamentally changed. You're still driving a car with a steering wheel to work. You're still sitting in traffic. At the office, you're still sitting at a desk, using a keyboard and a mouse, dealing with endless bureaucracy.
So in this world, AI turned out to be more like social media, a fun distraction, but not a fundamental productivity tool. We got better video games, but we didn't get better at our jobs.
Exactly. It made us more entertained, but not more productive. It didn't change the physical economy. And because productivity didn't get that J-curve jump, the economy couldn't outrun the debt. Growth slows to a crawl, maybe 1%. The U.S. effectively becomes the new Europe. Sluggish, heavily taxed, heavily regulated, with everyone fighting over a shrinking economic pie.
And in this scenario, China's GDP would likely surpass the U.S. just on sheer volume.
Almost certainly. And our living standards. They'd be stagnant. In a 1% growth world, it takes 70 years to double the standard of living. That means you basically live the same financial life as your parents did. You don't feel better off. There's no sense of progress.
Sounds exhausting, just a long, slow grind. But let's look at the other side. Let's look at scenario B. AI transforms, productivity surges.
This is the optimistic path. And Davis gives this a 45–55% probability. So he's leaning this way, but only slightly. It's almost a coin flip.
What's the vibe here? What does this 2035 feel like?
The vibe is the roaring 20s, or the 1990s tech boom. Daily life is visibly, tangibly different. Autonomous vehicles are dominant. You aren't driving, you're riding, maybe you're working or sleeping during your commute. Voice-enabled AI does all the grunt work in your life. You're not typing out emails. You're dictating complex commands to a digital assistant that executes them perfectly. Book me a flight to Chicago, find the best hotel near the conference, file my expense report, and order groceries for when I get home. And it just happens.
And the economy reflects that.
It's boom times. Growth hits 3% and stays there. Now, that doesn't sound like a huge number, 3% versus 1%, but because of the power of compounding, that gap is absolutely massive over a decade. The difference between 1% and 3% is the difference between stagnation and widespread wealth.
The U.S. stays ahead of China in this world.
Yes, because our innovation engine is running hotter. The debt becomes a manageable problem because the denominator of that debt to GDP ratio gets so big so fast.
And living standards.
They double every 25 years. That's the historical norm we used to have. It means you are significantly richer than your parents were, and you know that your kids will be richer than you. There's a sense of abundance and possibility.
There's one specific factor Davis highlights in this optimistic scenario that I found really fascinating. It wasn't about computing power. It was about healthcare.
This is the ultimate wild card. He says if AI can just make us type emails faster, that's nice, it's a productivity boost. But if AI can extend healthy longevity, if it can improve the health span of people from age 50 to 70, it changes the entire economic math of the country.
Because if you're healthy and active at 70, you might keep working part-time or start a business or travel or spend money. You aren't a drain on the healthcare system, you're a net contributor to the economy.
Exactly. Right now, healthcare costs just skyrocket in the last few years of a person's life. If AI can solve even a small part of the biology of aging, if it can detect cancer super early or create truly personalized medicine or keep people mobile and active for another decade, then scenario B becomes almost a certainty. Healthy people are productive people.
So we're at a coin flip, a slightly weighted coin, but still a coin flip. Heads, we get an economic boom. Tails, we get a long, slow drag. So how on earth do you invest for that? I can't just bet everything on heads.
You can't.
And this brings us to the final part 7, investment strategy. And Davis takes us to the Battle of the Nile in 1798.
I just love that an economist is using 18th century naval warfare strategy to explain portfolio construction. It really breaks up the charts and graphs nicely, and it's a perfect analogy for risk management.
So set the scene for us. It's Admiral Brueys of the French Navy against the legendary Admiral Nelson of the British Navy.
Admiral Brueys was a pure status quo thinker. He parked his entire fleet in what he thought was an unbeatable defensive line in shallow water near the Egyptian coast. He made an assumption. He bet his entire fleet on the assumption that the British wouldn't attack at night because that was sort of against the rules of safe naval conduct.
And they wouldn't risk sailing into the shallow water between his ships and the shore.
He bet on certainty. He bet on how things are usually done. He anchored his ships, put his feet up, and waited. He was rigid.
And Admiral Nelson?
Admiral Nelson saw the uncertainty. He realized the huge risk Brueys had just taken by being so certain. He didn't assume standard procedure. He split his fleet. He sent half his ships into that impassable, shallow water. He attacked at night from both sides. He took a calculated risk to account for the unexpected. He completely enveloped the French fleet.
And the result?
Total, utter destruction of the French fleet. Brueys died on his flagship. Nelson won a historic victory because he was resilient and adaptable. Brueys lost everything because he was rigid and bet it all on the status quo.
So bringing that back to us, what does a Nelson portfolio look like? How do we split our fleet so we don't get destroyed if scenario A happens, but we can still catch the wind if scenario B happens?
Davis calls this the megatrends-aware portfolio. And it involves staying the course, which was Jack Bogle's famous mantra, but with specific active adjustments for this tug-of-war we're in. You don't just anchor all your ships in one spot.
Okay, let's get into the specifics. What about stocks?
So this is one of the most surprising takeaways. In a massive AI boom, your first instinct is to think, buy tech, buy growth, buy the chip makers, buy all the AI startups. But Davis suggests the value stocks might actually be the biggest winner in scenario B.
That feels completely backwards. If AI is taking over the world, why would I buy an old school value company? Why buy a tractor company or a logistics firm or a bank?
Because of commoditization. Think about the California gold rush. Who got consistently rich? It wasn't the miners. Most of them went broke or died poor. It was the guys selling the shovels, the jeans, and the pickaxes.
Right.
But eventually, shovels become cheap. Everyone starts making shovels. In the AI rush, the technology itself eventually becomes a commodity. The algorithms become open source. The chips get cheaper and more plentiful. Who benefits the most then?
The people who use the shovels.
The companies that use the cheap, powerful tech to become superhumanly efficient. The tractor company uses AI to perfectly optimize its entire supply chain, slashing its costs and boosting its profits. The logistics firm uses AI to route its trucks with impossible precision, saving millions on fuel. These old economy companies see their margins just explode because of AI. They're the beneficiaries of the technology, not just the creators of it.
That makes a lot of sense. Plus, value stocks are currently much cheaper than growth stocks.
Exactly. So they have a built-in hedge. If the deficits drag, scenario A happens, and the tech bubble bursts, value stocks tend to hold up much better than overpriced tech stocks. You want to own companies that actually make money and pay dividends during a downturn. So it's a strategy that has the potential to win in the boom through efficiency and to survive the bust through its valuation.
What about international stocks?
Diversification is absolutely key. If the U.S. gets bogged down in its debt problem, that's scenario A, the U.S. dollar might really struggle. The U.S. market could stagnate for years. Having assets in other currencies and in other markets acts as a critical safety valve. You just don't want to have all your ships anchored in one harbor.
And bonds. Everyone seems to hate bonds right now. They feel boring and they lose money when interest rates go up.
But if yields rise, which they very well might in a high-deficit world, then bonds allow you to lock in that income. They provide the ballast for the portfolio. You need them so you don't sink if the stock market hits a big air pocket. In a volatile world, that steady, reliable income stream is the difference between panic selling at the bottom and being able to stay the course.
Now, Davis adds a little bit of spice right at the end. He references Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade.
The scene with the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
You must choose, but choose wisely.
He talks about active management, and this is interesting because Vanguard is usually all about index funds, index funds, index funds, pure passive investing by the whole market.
Yeah.
But here, he kind of opens the door to active management. Why? Is he going against the core Vanguard religion?
It's a very subtle but important shift. So investing in aggregate is a zero-sum game. For you to beat the market average, someone else has to lose to the market average. And history shows that net of their higher fees, most active managers lose. However, Davis argues that in this very specific environment, with these huge risks of a debt crisis on one hand and massive tech disruption on the other, there are some really big risks that might be hidden inside a simple index.
Can you give me an example of a risk hidden in the index?
Well, if the S&P 500 becomes, say, 30% mega cap tech stocks, and then that tech bubble bursts, the whole index crashes. If the main bond index is full of long-term government treasuries and then inflation spikes unexpectedly, the whole index crashes. A blind index has to buy everything, the good and the bad.
So a smart active manager could potentially dodge some of those bullets.
Exactly. A skilled active manager might, and I have to emphasize might, be able to navigate those specific landmines better than a blind index. They can make a conscious choice to say, I'm avoiding that extremely debt-heavy company, or I'm avoiding that overhyped tech stock that has no profits. But just like in the Indiana Jones movie, if you pick the wrong cup, the wrong manager, you can wither away pretty fast. The risk of picking a bad manager is very high.
So what's the practical advice then? Don't bet the farm on one person.
Keep the core of your portfolio in low-cost, diversified index funds. That's your safety. That's your base fleet. But if you want to play for that Nelson victory, maybe use a small portion of your portfolio for some active strategies that specifically target these megatrend risks. Don't bet the whole fleet on it, but maybe send a few of your ships into that shallow water. Use active management at the margins to handle the specific, identifiable volatility of the next decade.
Okay, so let's try to tie this all together. We've covered Skagway, World's Fairs, robot nurses, demographics, debt clocks, naval battles. It's a lot to process.
It is a lot. But the final verdict is one of cautious optimism. Davis is leaning, just slightly, towards scenario B. He thinks there's about a 55% chance that AI saves us versus a 40% chance that the debt sinks us.
55-40, those are decent odds, I guess, but it's not a slam dunk. It's basically a coin flip with a slightly weighted coin.
No, it is not a slam dunk, and that's his entire point. The future isn't written yet. It really is a tug-of-war, and we are the ones holding the rope. The policy choices we make matter. The innovations we pursue matter. How we choose to adapt as a society matters.
I want to go back to those people in Skagway just one last time. When that biplane finally landed, they had no idea what it would bring. Tourists, mail, bombs, the flu. They just knew one thing for sure.
The isolation was over.
The isolation was over. They knew the world had finally touched them.
And they prepared. They didn't just stand there. They went out and they built an airstrip. They adapted their town for this new reality. And that's our job now. We can't predict with certainty if 2035 will be a boom or a bust, but we have the tools, we have history, we have the data, we have these portfolio strategies to be ready for either outcome. We don't have to be helpless spectators.
Change is coming over the mountains. It's loud and it's fast.
So let's prepare.
Yeah.
Let's not be Admiral Bruys, anchored in the past.
And on that note, we want you to take a hard look at your own portfolio. Are you just sitting there in a straight line waiting for the status quo to continue forever? Or are you prepared for the night attack? Think about it. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you in the future.